12,000 cups of chocolate pudding, 1,250,000 airline miles. Somewhere between those two numbers sits one of the strangest, most legal scams a single family ever pulled off against the airline industry, and it started with a coupon nobody else bothered to read twice. The man behind it wasn't a hacker, a lawyer, or a con artist. He was a civil engineer who happened to be very, very good with numbers, and who couldn't stop himself from doing the math on a promotion everyone else treated as background noise. To understand why this moment mattered, you have to understand the strange economy that airlines had quietly built over the previous 2 decades. Frequent flyer programs started in the early 1980s as a simple loyalty gesture. Fly with us enough and we'll reward you with a free ticket. But by the late 1990s, these programs had transformed into something much bigger. Airlines discovered that miles themselves were valuable, almost like a private currency. Banks, hotel chains, rental car companies, and food brands began paying airlines real money to attach miles to their own products. A credit card swipe could earn miles, a hotel stay could earn miles, and, as it turned out, so could a frozen dinner. This was the hidden machinery behind the healthy choice promotion David was about to stumble into. It wasn't really about pudding at all. It was about an airline selling loyalty points to a food company, and a food company hoping the miles would sell a few more boxes of frozen entrees. Nobody involved expected a customer to actually read the fine print closely enough to break the system. The deal on the shelf was straightforward enough. Buy 10 healthy choice products, mail in the proof of purchase barcodes, and receive 500 frequent flyer miles from the airline of your choice. And if you acted before the end of May, the offer doubled, 1,000 miles for just 10 products. It was designed to move soup cans and frozen dinners off the shelves before summer. Most shoppers who noticed the promotion at all probably bought a few extra dinners and moved on with their week. David Phillips did not move on. He stood there and did the arithmetic in his head, the way an engineer instinctively does with any numbers put in front of him. At roughly $2 per frozen meal, 10 products worked out to about $20 for 1,000 miles. Airlines at the time were selling equivalent miles to their corporate partners for roughly 2 cents apiece, meaning 1,000 miles was worth around $20 on the open market too. On the surface, it was a fair trade, not especially remarkable. But David wasn't interested in a fair trade. He wanted to know what the cheapest possible healthy choice product was that still counted toward the promotion. If the rules only cared about the barcode and not what was actually inside the package, then the price of the food itself was almost irrelevant. That single realization sent him looking through every corner of the store and eventually to the discount racks of other grocery outlets nearby. That's where he found it. Individual cups of healthy choice chocolate pudding, marked down to 25 cents apiece at a discount grocery chain. Same brand, same qualifying barcode, a fraction of the price of a $2 frozen dinner. 10 pudding cups at $2.50 total could earn the same 1,000 miles that would otherwise cost $20 in frozen entrees. The loophole wasn't hidden in complicated legal language. It was hiding in plain sight, in the dessert aisle. He went home and explained the plan to his wife Cindy. By his calculation, if they wanted enough miles to fly the family to Europe and back, they'd need a serious quantity of pudding. Not 10 cups, not 100, but thousands. Cindy, a schoolteacher, later admitted she thought the whole idea sounded a little unhinged, but the math kept checking out, no matter how many times they ran it. What followed was less like a shopping trip and more like a small logistical operation. David and Cindy drove from store to store, buying out entire shelves of discounted healthy choice pudding wherever they could find it. Store employees started to recognize them. At one location, staff reportedly had to restock the shelf twice in a single afternoon because the couple kept coming back for more. By the time they were finished, they had purchased over 12,000 cups of pudding at a total cost of just over $3,000. To put that in perspective, 12,000 cups of pudding is enough dessert to feed a small town for a week. It filled a rented truck. It filled a section of David's university office. His colleagues at UC Davis, where he worked as a civil engineer managing campus utilities, began asking exactly what was going on in the storage room down the hall. Buying the pudding, it turned out, was the easy part. Every single cup had its own small barcode printed on the foil lid, and the promotion required each one to be physically cut out and mailed in with an official redemption form. 12,000 cups meant 12,000 tiny scraps of foil that had to be separated from the lid, sorted, counted into groups of 10, and stapled to paperwork. David and his family spent weeks at their kitchen table doing exactly that, night after night, scissors in hand, foil scraps piling up around them like confetti after a strange holiday. It was tedious, repetitive, and almost comically unglamorous for what would eventually become a nationally recognized triumph of consumer ingenuity. There was no shortcut for this part. No amount of clever math could replace the simple, physical labor of cutting out 12,000 barcodes by hand. Once the barcodes were sorted and the forms filled out, the family mailed in box after box of completed redemption certificates to Healthy Choices Processing Center. Then came the waiting. There was no guarantee at this stage that a company would honor an order this large without pushing back, questioning it, or quietly changing the rules before processing it. But the promotion's rules never said how the qualifying products had to be consumed, gifted, or disposed of, only that they had to be purchased and their barcodes submitted. Healthy Choice and the airlines who had underwritten the promotion had no legitimate grounds to refuse. In the end, David Phillips was credited with 1,250,000 frequent flyer miles, split mostly across American Airlines, with additional miles landing in his United, Delta, and Northwest accounts. It was enough for dozens of international round-trip tickets, enough, in theory, to fly a family across the world for the rest of their lives without ever paying full fare again. And what about the pudding itself? 12,000 cups of chocolate pudding is not something one family can realistically eat before it expires, so David and Cindy donated the vast majority of it to the Salvation Army and to local food banks around Sacramento. A small number of cups, by his own account only about 100, he kept for himself, admitting years later that he genuinely liked the stuff. The donation wasn't just generous, it was strategically brilliant. Because the pudding had been given to a registered charity, David was able to claim a tax deduction on the donated value, reportedly around $815, factor that write-off back into his original $3,000 investment, and the effective cost of the entire operation dropped even further, making each mile even cheaper than it already was. The story might have stayed a quiet family anecdote if not for a small newspaper item that caught a reporter's attention. Once the details went public, an ordinary engineer converting spare change into over 1 million miles of free travel, the story spread with startling speed. Local television picked it up, then national outlets. The Wall Street Journal ran a piece on it. Radio shows across the country invited David on to explain, step by step, exactly how he'd pulled it off. Almost overnight, a civil engineer from Davis, California became internationally known by a single nickname, the Pudding Guy. For Healthy Choice's parent company and the airlines involved, the sudden publicity created an awkward choice. They could refuse to honor the miles and risk a public relations disaster over reneging on their own promotion's stated terms, or they could pay out and quietly absorb the cost. They chose the latter, and in hindsight it turned out to be the smarter move anyway. Industry analysts later pointed out that the miles David received cost the companies a relatively small amount compared to the enormous wave of free publicity the story generated. In a strange way, the Pudding Guy ended up being one of the more cost-effective marketing moments in the promotion's history, even though that was never anyone's original intention. For David and his family, the reward went far beyond a single trip to Europe. Over the following years, they used the miles for first-class flights to destinations most families only dream about. A trip to the island of Mauritius in the southwestern Indian Ocean, a family vacation to the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, journeys to Peru with friends. His daughters grew up treating international travel as a normal weekend possibility, rather than a rare luxury. One of them later flew solo to Italy at 19 using leftover miles from her father's legendary pudding run. What's often left out of the story is that the pudding promotion wasn't a one-time fluke for David. It was the beginning of a much longer hobby. He became a fixture in the small but devoted community of frequent flyer enthusiasts who study loyalty programs the way stock traders study markets, looking for promotions where a company has, even briefly, misjudged the value of what it's giving away. Decades after the pudding incident, he was still finding similar opportunities, still traveling to new countries, more than 40 by his own count, and still giving occasional talks to travel industry groups curious how he does it. What makes David Phillips' story endure more than 25 years later isn't really about pudding or even about airline miles. It's about what happens when a company writes a promotion assuming customers will behave the way marketers expect them to, buying a reasonable amount, following the spirit of the offer rather than its literal wording. Most people do exactly that, but every so often, someone reads the actual rules with the patience of an engineer checking a blueprint, notices a gap between what the company meant and what the company actually wrote, and walks straight through it. The gap isn't illegal, it isn't even dishonest, it's simply unnoticed, until someone with enough patience and a calculator finds it. David Phillips wasn't the last person to find a gap like this either. Years later, another traveler noticed that an airline was accidentally selling 1 cent per mile bulk purchase deals with almost no cap, and quietly bought enough miles to fly business class around the world for the price of a used car. A different couple discovered they could buy $1 coins from the US, mint using a credit card, earn card rewards points on the purchase, then deposit those same coins straight back into their bank account, turning a rewards program into a money-printing loop, at least until the mint changed its policy. Each of these stories follows the same pattern as the pudding run. A company builds a promotion for one kind of customer, and an unusually patient person finds the version of that promotion nobody accounted for. What separates David from most of these copycats is that his hack required almost no technical trickery at all. No software, no financial engineering, no exploiting a website bug. It required a grocery cart, a calculator, and an almost absurd amount of patience for repetitive manual labor. That's part of why the story still gets told at dinner parties and travel conferences a quarter-century later. It's a loophole anyone could have found if they'd been willing to actually do the work of cutting out 12,000 barcodes by hand. The story became so well known that it eventually found its way into popular culture. Adam Sandler's character in the film Punch Drunk Love is loosely inspired by David's real-life pudding scheme, hunting for a similar mile-earning promotion through discount pudding cups of his own. Real accountants and travel bloggers still cite David's case as the founding legend of what's now an entire subculture of travel hacking. Ordinary people who treat loyalty programs less like a marketing gimmick and more like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Healthy Choice, for what it's worth, never publicly regretted the whole affair. In later interviews, company representatives pointed out that the promotion had done exactly what it was designed to do: get people talking about the brand. They just hadn't imagined the conversation would center on a man affectionately nicknamed after a dessert. The promotion itself was quietly discontinued not long after, though nobody officially blamed David for that. It had simply run its course, the way most marketing campaigns eventually do, pudding scandal or not. David Phillips never broke a single rule. He just read them more carefully than the people who wrote them ever expected anyone to. And somewhere out there, right now, another company is quietly making the exact same mistake, writing a promotion, certain that nobody would ever bother doing the math.